Brought to you in association with Grendel Press. This is Werewolf, the podcast. A serial killer drama.
Oh, the weather outside is frightful, but the fire is so delightful.
Hello, listener. This is Will the Werewolf, and this is Werewolf the podcast. And just to say, there's a Facebook group that I started in 3 months from now. Yeah, I'm re-recording the podcast, so there's a Facebook group down in the description if you want to join me. I already have one member, so I know I've got a listener. If you want to join me on Facebook, that's fine. You can also find my Twitter handle down there and, stuff. I'm just going to start a new series today, which is going to be called The Werewolf and the Hitchhiker. It's one of my favourites, so here we go. The new model Land Rover Defender was making its way easily down the A9 through the snow. Why did I go into this level of detail? Because, to be honest, I'm showing off, and this car is awesome. I was heading back to Manchester after a weekend on the slopes. Yeah, I am a fucking werewolf who likes to snowboard. It's not just about killing and torturing for me. I love to get out into the hills and do a bit of boarding as well. Also, I can become my werewolf in the snowy mountains and have some wolf time away from prying eyes. Wolf time does not always involve the killing of humans. The deer population in Scotland is always high, so not far off the fun piste is deer for the chase, and the boot trunk of my car was now packed with some fine venison for the freezer. My posit, my wolf soul, my invisible wolf soul Fen, was sat in the passenger seat. I know what you are thinking, I really do. You've got a big hairy beast on your brand new cream leather. Well, he is a big hairy beast, but he's the soul of a wolf he once was. So he has no physical nature until we combine to form a physical wolf or werewolf, which we will not be doing in this car, that is for sure. He was asking me about the wolves in these mountains. He seemed genuinely shocked that there was not any, and a mite angry that humans... He always dropped the H. Humans, as he called them, had murdered them all. Humans, as usual, if scared of something, kill it. We'd enjoyed hunting in the mountains. He had been confused why we had not smelled any evidence of any packs out there. The brutal truth of what had happened brought his thoughts to the murder of the human race. He sat brooding internally for a long time. I turned the music up and enjoyed the weather and the time with myself as we travelled. Sometimes Fen can be a bit intrusive in my head, so as he sat and scowled and internalised his hate, I just daydreamed without his thoughts being involved. It had been a great weekend in Aviemore. I'd managed to combine some killing of deer and locals with the killing of smooth lines on the piste. I mean, it wasn't the Alps, but it's good. Murders were unheard of in Aviemore, but a surprising number of missing persons had been reported this weekend, and a few more missing people had not been noticed as missing yet. You can notice a missing person? Can you notice a missing person? That seems to be one of them oxymoron things to me. I had not left much evidence. Well, I'd not left much of the bodies, to be honest. Human flesh was so delicious. Nicer than venison, to be honest. When you get the chance, try it. You'll be surprised. The cheeks are the best bit. Honestly, I don't know why that is. Maybe it's all the exercise you get from talking all the fucking time. I was driving back home, enjoying the journey in my big new Defender. Did I mention that? Warm and cosy within my big metal shell with wheels. The snow was building rapidly and the 4x4 was being tested a little on the slippy roads, but I had the snow tyres and the full winter package if needed, so this was a fun test. Also, if I got stuck, then I could always become Wolfie. That was an unstoppable form even in the worst weather. I love this time of year. Whatever happened, I could feel free and alone in the snow. To enjoy this beauty in full for a moment, I pulled over and looked at the fields deep with white powder leading up into the mountains. The mountains were there, and they were my idea of perfect isolation. The perfect view as I enjoyed a good wee. A wee with a view, such bliss. After the final shakes to drip and air dry, I just took a deep breath and visually devoured the sights. I was so happy at this moment that I dropped to all fours, letting my posit fill my body with his power and mind. I morphed into the giant quadruped wolf as the remains of my clothes blew away in the wind. I snarled in approval at the change and at the weather, shaking my thick pelt to dislodge the first of the lying snowflakes. I scratched behind my ear with my hind paw. Only quadrupeds can tell you how awesome that feeling is. It really hits the spot. Briefly, I toyed with the idea of leaving the car and going in the hills to live as a wolf. This was my chance to never look back on this human side of life, to be the beast and be nothing more than the beast for the rest of my time on this crappy planet. I shook my head and came back to myself as I dropped into the services to fill up on fuel and to get the ambrosia of the gods, the sweet nectar known as coffee, my only vice. Well, that's bollocks, not my only vice, but the only one that I wanted at this moment. I noticed a small person with a little sign just outside the petrol station. A hitchhiker with a card labelled Manchester, of all places. A bizarre destination request for being this far up into the Scottish Highlands. At the pump, I got out of the car to fill the tank. I smelt on the air the person, and it intrigued me that the person wrapped in all that warm clothing was a young female human. She smelt sweaty, sweet and stale, unwashed and unkept for a few days. She was musty, unclean, yet something was very attractive about her. I could sense that she was in a low mood, frightened and very, very vulnerable. Perfect! Tonight's main meal and pastime for pleasure had just revealed itself. Oh, how life can be so wonderful at times, bringing me beautiful opportunities like this. After filling the tank, I went in the station to pay the money I owed and wandered out with an awful coffee. It wasn't coffee. I sipped it and was disgusted and chucked it at the station's window it was a very childish manner. I wasn't proud of this action, but to be honest, the liquid was not coffee. It was a lie. I smiled at the cashier as they came to the window and wiped the window that had been steamed by the condensation. He showed his face briefly, and I waved as he withdrew slowly to try to pretend that he'd never been there. I smirked and got ready to carry on my journey south to Manchester. As I pulled out the station, I made the impulsive decision to pick it up. A single young female hitchhiking was too good an opportunity to miss, so I didn't. As I drew up just past her, the tyres slightly lost their grip in the snow and I slid to a halt. The person encumbered with a suitcase on wheels tried to run towards the car. The snow built up as she pulled the case through the snow, and it got slower and slower, and she was struggling to get it to the car. She was tiny and weak. Oh dear. A little lost lamb on the road. What could go wrong for her? Well, what could go wrong for her was actually going wrong in this case. I stepped from the car and looked for witnesses. There seemed to be none in evidence. I used my service training to make sure I was far enough out of the petrol station to no longer be on any cameras, and I could not detect any technology viewing this situation. I could not be 100% sure, but it felt that there was very little in the way of observation, and I smiled as I walked forward to the poor young lady. She halted in front of me, and I saw the little face smile from deep in that surrounding hood of her parka. "Hi, do you need a lift?" I asked. She stopped and smiled and then nodded. I flashed my teeth back and reached for the suitcase. My hand came up and grabbed the front of her jacket. I lifted her from her feet and threw her bodily away from me. She screamed as she flew, and I could hear that she was winded as her head and back impacted the floor. She now lay mewling in the snow, and if she'd wanted to, she could have drawn a beautiful pattern of a snow angel taking off into the night at the end of a snowy groove that she'd made. She definitely did not want to create a snow angel at this point. She wanted to run away from the horrible man. She cried out and scrambled to her hands and knees and started screaming for help. I smiled and quickly walked up behind her, grabbing her oversized jacket between the shoulders and lifting her from the ground. She screamed again and kicked some more as I turned from the road into the surrounding woodland, dragging her kicking and screaming on her front deeper into the trees. As cover, she protested, and then silence. Pleasant daydreams. Again I shook my head from my thoughts. Deposit giggled. That was a good one. Kill Fen, he posited in my brain. I laughed with him. It's a definite maybe. Let's see what we find. I pulled up where the hitchhiker had parked herself. She did not move as I got out of the car. I got out of the car and wandered up to her with my hands deep in my cardigan pockets. What are you laughing at? Yes, I rock a cardigan and I love it. I looked deep into the hood of the huge khaki Parker jacket and bending over to be at eye level with her, I smiled my wickedly handsome smile. My smile is always a winner, and with it revealed to her, I sensed her relax and melt a little. She offered the handle of the case, which I lifted and carried to the back of the car, pressing the auto open of the 4x4 to get the case into the boot. Hear that? Auto open. This is so fucking cool, this car. Once the case was in the back, I silently showed her around to the passenger door like a gentleman of yesteryear. As I walked behind her, I took in my posit and became the werewolf. She'd not noticed the transformation and started to turn towards me, unaware. Her eyes suddenly registered shock as she met mine, her mouth a soundless "oh." I darted forward and bit into her soft and succulent throat. The arteries torn, spewed her lifeblood into my mouth. As a delicious torrent, I sucked on the sweet, sweet juice, imbuing her very spirit through this ingestion of her vital life fluid. She struck me. Her blows weakened as her body succumbed to the loss of her life. Her struggle ended with a sigh, and she fell limp. I dropped her to the floor and ate. I shook my head out of this orgasmic daydream yet again. At this point, I'd not said a word to her. She'd hesitated for a moment in making a decision, and it would be maybe a life-changing choice at this point. I could sense the indecision in her head, but I could feel she was cold and wet and hungry, and this overcame the worries of getting into this car with this handsome older man. She climbed into the car and thanked me as she took her seat. I walked around to the driver's side, noting if anyone had witnessed this casual kidnapping. No other cars were on the road. The windows of the station were steamed up with condensation. The CCTV cameras were all focused on the station's forecourt and not, as I thought, able to see me take her. No one knew that I had this little morsel. This was too simple. I got into the car and sat down, clunking myself into the seatbelt, and used the windshield wiper to clear the heavy build-up of snow that had already started to mass on the screen. She had unzipped her much too big down jacket and was taking it off with some difficulty. Once free from the coat, she brushed back her tousled red hair with her hand. She then loosened her scarf gently, which was a definite home knit, judging by the smell it gave off. It was a recent knit by a granny. I locked the doors from the inside. She was trapped now, and I knew she could not escape me. "You fucking stupid child," I told her as I slapped her face back into the chair. "You're now mine, to do what I wish with. You are a fucking idiot." She shook her head and tried to move forward in her seat, her breathing heavy, on the edge of tears. She did not understand what was happening. She reached for the door, scrambling at the handle, crying and weeping.
Please, let me go! Let me go!
"No, you stupid little bitch," I said as I pulled her back in her seat. Again I slapped her face with my open hand. "Shut up and sit still." Then she just lost it. She went crazy, screaming and shouting as she was throwing a fit. Her hands and feet flailed in every direction. I mean, she seemed to have no concern whether she damaged my interior or not. I reached for my seat and grabbed and crushed her neck in my grip. It silenced her, stopping her irritating movements and sounds. The pleasure of the silence was now wonderful. I'm going to have to stop this. I had to shake my head again, get rid of this joyous, joyous daydream, and just smiled at the thoughts. Jovial violence, pleasure in stopping an irritation, and I came back to the real world. I turned and smiled at the unviolated little lady. She was drenched from head to foot and in a pair of skinny jeans. She had pink trainers on, not so pink now, which were wet and caked in melting snow, which was fucking annoying in my lovely clean car. She wore a tight pink knitted jumper that hugged her young, lithe body in all the right places. She stopped moving and I noticed that she had caught me checking her out. I ran my eyes up her little body to meet her eyes. The predator in me was very happy with this lucky find. It was all looking like a delicious evening meal was ahead of me until I got to that face and that fucking smile. A beautiful smile that hit me like a well-aimed half-brick to the skull. Her lips were full and red from the cold, and part-open mouth revealed perfect white teeth and a cute coyness. Her hair was the red of the autumnal woodland. It was a mixed-up mess of reds and oranges, and my heart imagined them as the flames engulfing a tender, dry forest. That hair was badly styled and badly cut, as though done by her own untrained hands or someone else's. It was tousled and shoulder length on one side and short and uneven on the other. In the traditional sense, her fringe was too thin and broken to be called a fringe. All in all, this mess of a haircut would look awful on many. No, it would look awful on anyone. But on her, for some reason, this just added to her sickly sweetness. It made her obvious in her innocence. She shone a beacon of delight in the bitterness of the world. Damn. Fen was giggling in the background of my mind. Will and Girly in a tree, Kissing, he sang. The skin of her face was pale and freckled. Her eyes were as green as a glinting emerald and full of warmth and life. She was a breathtaking example of a human. I sat there in silence for a moment, staring. I just sat staring. Eventually I nodded at her and went back to preparing to drive, checking my mirrors. I paused for a moment, then checked behind me and pulled out onto the feeder to the A9. She sat in silence for a while. I sensed that she was a little hesitant to speak as she rubbed her hands on her wet jeans. She was very nervous. I could smell it. To create conversation, I took some gum from the side compartment of my door. Do you want some? I asked.
Aye, please.
Her accent was the lilting accent of the Highlands, and it thrilled me. God. She could only get more attracted if she was naked and then dipped in chocolate. Obviously, not sat on my white leather seats covered in chocolate though, that would have been far too messy to deal with. She carefully took the gum and checked it all over before looking at me. I realised that she was doing this, so I laughed and popped the piece of gum into my own mouth to show that it wasn't poisoned. She dropped the gum into her mouth and started loudly masticating her own on seeing me chew. She was obviously ravenously hungry and overly enjoying this tasty morsel. Why Manchester? I only ask as I was actually born and brought up there. That's why I stopped. You intrigued me. I lied to her. Looking at her, she smiled at me, and then she looked down with beautiful hooded eyes and comforted herself by stroking her hands over one another. Her body language made it obvious she was attracted to me, but for fuck's sake, she was a little too perfect. I think I would get sugar rush and a belly cramp from eating this one.
I have friends down there.
She said, ending with a drawn-out pause and an over-dramatic, wistful look out of the passenger window while she thought about continuing with the subject.
I just needed to get away from him. It was just so boring and soul-destroying that I needed to go and try and have some experiences in life, you know?
She smiled, looking up and shining a mesmerising radiance that raised and settled the beast inside. This was going to be an interesting adventure, a very interesting adventure. I like this thing. I liked it a lot, but I'm sure that I would get bored soon and eat it. My posit was doing a lot of internal tutting on a constant monologue in my head. He was in the back of the car now, laid out on the seats relaxing, his gigantic head lolled over the car's middle console where it gently rested, his nose on my elbow. There is nothing quite as relaxed as a relaxed posit. You can sense contentment and comfort. "What the fuck is going on?" he sent me through his thoughts. "I sense that we're not going to eat this one. Are you not going to eat it? Are you going to fuck it then? What the fuck are you going to do, Fen?" I smiled and sent the thought back that I really didn't know, but it will sort itself out in the end. And that's the end of the episode. Thanks for listening. If you'd like to support the podcast, there is a link that says support the show down in the description. That would be lovely. Thanks. Bye.
Brought to you in association with Grendel Press. This is Werewolf, the podcast, a serial killer drama.